Good afternoon. Welcome to the Deeper Dive, presented by no one, Adam. This is our first Deeper Dive on the new platform on awesomeo.com. Happy to be here. It's been a long time coming. Get it kicked off on a Monday, Labor Day weekend. Hopefully, everyone's enjoying the holiday. I'm stuffed like a pig with hot dogs and burgers. No beer today, though. We're working, Adam. That's the thing. Somebody, my fiance's stepdad's like, how's work? This and that. I'm trying, and he manages a car dealership, and he was working today, and I was trying to explain to him, you work in DFS. It's a pretty nice gig, but you don't get off on holidays, right? Baseball is like every major holiday throughout the summer. They have 15 games. Uh, Football, Thanksgiving, basketball, you have 5 games every single Christmas. There's no respite when you're doing DFS.
Yeah, I actually almost forgot about this show today. One of my friends texted me at like
Good.
3:30. It was like, "Hey man, I'm cooking out if you want to come over." And I was sitting there, I'm like, "Yeah, I don't have anything else to do." Like, I was like, never mind. I guess I'll be there at like 7.
Yeah, you're off to a good start.
Yeah.
Uh, so Josh and I did the process show today, essentially outlining our process for sports, baseball in general. We'll be getting into football soon, but not only that, more so looking at specific slates, not fully breaking them down like we're going to do on this show. On the deeper dive, we will take a game by game approach. All of you guys that came over with us from FanVice, you know how it works. We get into ownership, we get into projections, we try and get into everything, but also take instead of taking like a 30,000-foot view from it, we zoom in a bit and try and hit on each game where we think is viable. So that's what we do. The process show in the morning. I love the format. Adam, you and I will be switching off each day with Josh. The days that we're writing the article, we won't be on. The day that we aren't, we will be on. And break down the process, how we're looking at each slate. Fortunately for today, we had an early slate, and now we have a brand new main slate to touch on. You wrote the article today, 5 games. You mentioned that you considered writing for the day slate, but it just wasn't happening with the way it broke down. How are you looking at the breakdown and structure of this 5 game main slate?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a slate, and you see it a lot on 5 game slates where if you're playing tournaments, I think even more so than usual, kind of throwing projections, not completely out the window, but kind of putting them on the back burner compared to leveraging against the field and trying to be unique in your roster construction is the way to go here because there's looking at pitching, there are a few really good pitching plays, but there's only a few. And whenever you have a few guys, it just makes it so easy for the chalk to bust when you're fading like one or two pitchers, not when you're fading 4 or 5 good plays. So I think that the best way really in tournaments to approach this slate is going to be getting unique at least one of your pitcher spots on the 2 pitcher sites, and not being afraid to kind of go contrarian here just because I think it's ownership's going to be so concentrated.
Yeah, I think so too. Josh and I discussed this earlier today. You and I, for the past couple of weeks, have been discussing this with the way baseball gets in late August, early September, and even to some extent throughout the season. Just being more willing to look at dirt cheap pitchers, even if it might not be the perfect spot, even if they may not be the most elite pitcher. Jose Urena from earlier today is a good example. Yesterday, Lance Lynn being like 45% owned is a good example of someone that you can fade. I think more so you and I, at least recently, have discussed the idea of not getting too hung up on a certain pitcher or on fading a certain pitcher and being a little bit more flexible when it comes to some of these cheaper guys if there are bats that you really want to get into a lineup.
Yeah, and I think this is a slate where that's going to come into play, especially on DraftKings where you do have the 2 pitchers, because I haven't looked at ownership projections yet. I'm actually pulling them up now, but my assumption is that you're going to see Zach Godley and Alex Wood be the 2 most popular pitchers, followed by DeGrom. But DeGrom obviously is just the most talented pitcher on the slate. So I think that one way maybe to be unique is to pair DeGrom with that entire range of cheap arms. Stroman I think would be the best, but then you have Ramirez, you have Springs, you have Rogers, just cheap guys that it's baseball and they could have decent games, and it's going to give you unique roster construction without really costing you much in the way of upside. So I think this is a slate where what you're talking about really will come into play.
Yeah, I think so as well. Let's dive into it. Tampa Bay and Toronto, only 5 games here. Jake and Josh Engelman will be coming up after us to bring you up to lock. We're going to do our best to cover a full 2 hours for 5 games, but they will come up after us, give you a different approach, and provide a different look on how this slate breaks down from an ownership projection standpoint. Hopefully, we can intertwine the two and send you on your way. Marcus Stroman and Ryan Stanek, as we know, Adam, a lovely bullpen game once again for Tampa Bay. They've been largely successful deploying this strategy this season, but it makes it hard to target pitching from here, and it makes it hard to target hitters against them, being that their bullpen has actually been really solid this season. By the way, the sun is just right in my right eye, so I'm trying to ignore it. Forgive me. What do you make of this, though, Adam? And you and I have both been very much willing to deploy relief pitchers from this Tampa Bay team if they're in the right spots, if it's a pitcher that we think is decent enough that can give you 5 or 6 frames in middle relief. Go ahead and let's talk about pitching here.
Yeah, so it should be Jalen Beeks for Tampa Bay today. We really don't know how they'll utilize him. His last game, he went 3 or 4 innings, even though he didn't give up any runs. The game before that, he threw over 90 pitches. So we've seen Kevin Cash be all over the place with his relievers and how long he'll let them go. So there's obviously a lot of risk there. If he
my theory on Kevin Cash, if you're sucking, he's going to let you go 6 innings. If you're throwing a gem in relief, you go 3 innings max, like Yarbrough.
It's almost I haven't gone back to check it. I wonder if it does correlate to that, just because, like, if it's a 1-run game, he pulls them and brings in, the next best reliever.
I don't know. I don't, yeah. But it sure seems that way.
Yeah, it definitely has felt that way. But so obviously, you carry that risk with Jalen Beeks. He does have talent, but you just really have no idea how many pitches he's going to throw. As far as Toronto at bats, if you wanted to go to some one-offs here, I think that Beeks is someone that you can take power hitters against. He's a fly ball pitcher. He can be home run prone. So if you wanted to look to, there's not a lot of power in this lineup, but Justin Smoak. Are you? I saw Beeks earlier. I haven't double checked it.
All right, I'll dig into it a little bit more, but yeah, I was seeing Chirinos.
As of when I wrote the article a couple hours ago, it was supposed to be Beeks.
So 2:46 p.m., Chirinos is slated to cover the bulk of innings after bullpen day opener Ryan Stanek exits Monday. Mark Topkin of the Tampa Bay Times reports. Now,
all right, well, that was after I wrote, so yeah.
Okay, yeah, this is just a RotoWire report, but looking now like Chirinos. So assuming that's the case, and we've had Kevin Cash ram us on this before, right? Like, it wouldn't be the first time. But let's assume it is Chirinos here. What do you make of Chirinos coming in, throwing 4 or 5 innings?
Pretty much the same thing that I was saying about Beeks. I mean, we still have no idea how deep Chirinos is going to go into the game. He is the same price on DraftKings that Beeks is at 5,600. So it's not like you're getting a really, really cheap price tag. It is worth noting, I guess, that he has gone at least 5 innings in 5 straight appearances, whereas Beeks we'd seen kind of be all over the place. So if you're multi-entering and you want to run 5 to 10% Chirinos, you should be fine there. But I think that there are enough cheap pitching options on this slate for your SP2 that we have a better idea of how many pitchers they're going to throw. That I think I would still lean towards some of those guys. One of those guys being Marcus Stroman here. We've seen Stroman have a pretty bad season, but he's also been pretty unlucky. His xFIP's at 3.8. He has a 5.27 ERA, so has been unlucky in that regard. Still has a very good 62% ground ball rate. Is coming off the disabled list, hasn't pitched in a couple of weeks, but it was a blister issue, not an arm issue. He threw 88 pitches in his most recent start, so I'm not expecting him to be limited here. I haven't seen that he will be. So I think that he's cheap enough where we can use him as, an SP2 candidate and, hope that we get a pretty good, 6-inning, 18 to 22 points out of him.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to what we were saying and how you said it could probably be applicable on this slate. Marcus Stroman is not expensive. He does have a decent matchup. He's facing a Tampa Bay offense that, for all intents and purposes, is not good. This Tampa Bay offense, what was it, like early July or maybe late June, where they actually started looking decent, and then they came back down to earth, and you realize, okay, it's still Tampa Bay. They're not good. They moved some players. The lineup was even more diluted than it was before. Right now, their active roster has the 10th highest K rate, and they really sit around middle of the league in everything, right? 18th in weighted on base average. Isolated slugging is actually towards the bottom. It's 24th in baseball. WRC plus is down there. in the bottom 10 as well, bottom 15 or so. So it's not that good of an offense. Stroman has struggled mightily this year. There's no questioning that, but he doesn't give up a lot of power. So I think this could actually be a decent spot for him. It's not a terrible park. He still gets a lot of ground balls. Let's go ahead and say you're playing 50 lineups. Actually, how many lineups are you playing tonight?
I'm not sure, but I'm also only playing on FanDuel, so won't have as much
Okay,
Stroman.
let's say you got 50 lineups. How much Stroman exposure do you anticipate having? 25%?
Probably on the two pitcher sites, I'd probably end up around like 25%.
Okay. Yeah, on FanDuel, I guess it makes things a little bit more complicated. I'd be all right with 25%.
Yeah,
I,
I'd probably cap him around like 30 and see what my projections give me.
can
Because
Strom
on the two pitcher sites, I really like the idea of trying to get to the Grom, and Stroman helps you do that.
Absolutely. And look, can Stroman kill you? Yeah, absolutely. But he's also very capable of giving you the 18 to 23 DraftKings point game, which at that price point, you're going to be very happy with.
If we knew
So
Stroman was 100% here, he would be a top point per dollar play at 6,600. I
undoubtedly.
think he's 100%, but obviously there is, at least some level of concern there. And where you have Zach Godley and Alex Wood in good spots for cash games, I would just go with those guys. But for tournaments, I mean, Stroman, I think, would just be much higher owned than he will be if he hadn't missed the last 2 weeks.
So are you targeting bats in this game?
No.
Me neither. I don't think it's really necessary. Chirinos is good enough pitcher. Their bullpen in Tampa Bay alone is good enough. And again, even if you see Stroman get beat up a little bit, he's just not the type of guy that generally gives up those big stack type of games. Adam, he gets. I don't like to say he's been BABIP to death because it's not true. He's thrown some really bad pitches with runners on, with two runners on, bases loaded, and just a very unstroman like. But I don't think you need to target hitters here from either side of this game. And even if you did want to pick on Stroman, you're not exactly talking about a juggernaut offense in Tampa Bay.
No, I mean, it's a positive park shift for them, and you do have some lefty power with Chu, but Choi, sorry, but Bowers is hitting eighth. He'd be one of the guys that I like.
Yeah.
Brandon Lau is okay at second base, but yeah, just not an overly appealing spot.
Agreed. Let's move on to the Angels in Texas. You guys have any questions? Well, now we have the chats, whether it's in Twitch, YouTube, we got you covered. Any questions you got, we'll do what we can. We'll do what we can here. And I'm still trying to figure out what the relief situation is, because now I'm seeing conflicting reports. So we'll let you know.
Kevin Cash probably has no idea right now.
What's that?
Are you talking about the Tampa Bay game?
Yeah, you're right. Cash doesn't know yet. Right. Exactly. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. Kyle Once 12 says Tampa isn't bad. Everyone in that clubhouse thinks they can make the playoffs. Look, I've been very, very complimentary of Tampa Bay all year long. What they have done with a skeleton crew of a roster, and literally at one point they had 0 starting pitchers on their active roster, is very impressive. But that doesn't mean this is a team that, against somebody like Stroman, is going to go out there and rock him. Could they? Sure. But at 6,600, I'm willing to take my chances. Whether they think they can make the playoffs is one thing. Having a Malik Smith, Matt Duffy, Tommy Pham, Joey Wendell, Brandon Lau, Kevin Kiermaier lineup, I guess to throw Ji-Man Choi in there is not bad, but it's not the most formidable lineup. And sometimes you have to go ahead and roll the dice. You have to take some risks. Right now, the implied run total for this Tampa Bay Rays team is sitting at 4.2. It's the 5th lowest on this slate. So that's all I have to say on that. Let's talk about the Angels in Texas, Adam. Matt Shoemaker, the maker of shoes, the cobbler, returning from a 60-day DL stint. I think he's been out since like late March.
His one game was March 31st.
March 31st, right. Solid pitcher. Before the injuries, before all of that, when he started really implementing the splitter at a higher rate, that's when everything started to fall into place. Prior to that, he struggled a lot, but he did not throw many pitches in his relief outing, in his tune-up starts, and he hasn't pitched April, May, June, July. It's been like almost 5 months since this guy's pitched, so hard to believe he has a very long leash. And then you have Jeffrey Springs, who's made 10 appearances this year, Adam. All of them have come out of the bullpen. In terms of strikeouts, he's a K per nine or K per inning pitcher, but he threw 7 pitches his last time out, 34 before that. Expected run totals in this game, you have Texas at 5.4. You have the Angels at 5.2, two of the 4 highest marks on this slate. And being that it's at Globe Life Park, we know weather gets very hot and sticky here. However, it's only 78 degrees in Arlington today, Adam.
Yeah, basically a bullpen game for both teams to some extent. Shoemaker, it would be surprising to see him go more than 65 to 70 pitches here. And he's someone who, even when he was healthy, he pitched much better at home than he did on the road. The size of the ballpark helped him out, and also just the difficult batter's eye with the rock pile back there, similar to how we saw Jared Weaver be much better at home. A 24% strikeout rate in Los Angeles for Shoemaker compared to 18% away from home since the start of 2016. So not a very appealing spot for him. I do obviously like these Texas bats against him. And then the fact that he's not fully stretched out helps them as well. So, the left-handed power here, Chu, Odor, Mazzara, Profar, Gallo, I really like all those guys. And then obviously you can mix in Robinson Chirinos at a weak catcher position, gives you a lot of upside. So I like him quite a bit. And then on the other side, Jeffrey Springs isn't bad, but like you said, he's not really stretched out. The most pitch, he's only thrown into the low to mid 50s in pitches this season. And you're going to have Ariel Jurado coming in after him in relief. It sounds like he's someone who gets 0 strikeouts, and you're going to have some of these, Angels bats be able to do some damage against him. So I think that stacking this Angels team actually does make some sense here, because I think you'll see Texas have higher ownership than them, but they're going to be in a really good spot once they get into the bullpen. You have Cole Calhoun, who's just been one of the best hitters in baseball since making adjustments at AAA and coming back. He's still very reasonably priced. He's still not usually that highly owned. He's in a quote-unquote lefty-lefty matchup to start the game, so you probably won't see people really go to him, but he'll be in a good spot once Springs gets out of the game. Mike Trout obviously is one of the best plays on the slate here. Fletcher and Simmons are both guys who don't strike out a lot, and they're eligible at very, very weak second base and shortstop positions. So I like both of them. And then, if you wanted to throw in a 5th guy, there's nobody else that's good at hitting in this lineup. But that 1 through 4, I think, is actually a pretty decent spot for the Angels.
Yeah, I think so too. Texas, in terms of bullpen, is, I don't know, where would you put them? I mean, they've kind of bounced all over the place in terms of xFIP and such, but really, I look at this as middle of the road. It really depends on who's fresh out of the bullpen. But
yeah,
right now, the active roster, Texas ranks, I think they have the 13th worst xFIP, so really middle of the road. And then on a home runs per 9 rate, granted they pitch at a terrible park, they're about 11th worst in baseball.
Yeah, they've been kind of middle of the road all season, and like you said, it has mattered who comes in. But with Jurado being the first guy out of the bullpen, and then the guys that are currently in the pen just not being that good either. I mean, Matt Moore has been one of their long guys. Eddie Butler pitched through 62 pitches yesterday, so not available today. But in general, we've seen them give up. When they get behind early, we've seen them bring in some bad relievers and just give up monster games.
Yeah, I think so. And Shoemaker, I think if everything's going smoothly, he throws 70. If it looks ugly early, you see like 60 or so. He made 1 relief appearance in single A through 4 innings, 59 pitches. Very solid outing, 4 scoreless, no hits, 6 strikeouts. I think you could probably project him at 4 innings, 5 innings if everything's going well.
Yeah, exactly. And just like for tournament purposes, there is so much upside because things can go poorly. I mean, it's the second start the guy's made in 6 months.
Yeah, and the first at the major league level coming inside Globe Life Park. I get that it's not scalding hot. Surprisingly, under 80 degrees. Still a lot of humidity, though, like 80, 85, 82, 85% humidity. Yeah, I think you have to like Texas here. I am a fan, Adam. I don't know if you are. We haven't talked about him all season, but I am a fan of Shoemaker. I think he's a pretty solid pitcher. But this isn't a spot where I'm expecting him to thrive.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Shoemaker in specific spots, and pitching in Texas is not one of them.
Yeah. What else do you have on this game?
Just as many hitters as you can possibly get.
All right. Yeah, I mean, honestly, there aren't that many teams. Implied run totals, Vegas totals are really only one piece of the puzzle. But there aren't a ton that are up there. You have, of the 10 teams playing, 4 of them are at 3.8 or lower. Um, 4 of them are above 5, right?
I don't think
Angels,
just I don't think just going all in on game stacks here is even that crazy of an idea.
it probably isn't. Uh, no, I don't see an issue with it. There is another spot that we'll get to in a moment. I think is going to be pretty appealing. But Angels at 5.1, Seattle against Josh Rogers at 5.2, Texas against Shoemaker at 5.5. So these have risen just since the last I looked. And then Arizona against Brian Mitchell. That one's in Chase Field at 5.7. Let's get there now. San Diego and Arizona. Zach Godley, Brian Mitchell. As I pointed out, yes, this team, the Arizona Diamondbacks, has the highest implied run total on this slate. It is above either team at Arlington. So take that for what it is, for what it's worth. Zach Godley right now, Adam, a 254 money line favorite. So not only do they have the highest expected total, he's the heaviest favorite on this slate, which says quite a bit facing this San Diego team that is going to strike out a lot against right-handed pitching. Now, Zach Godley has not been himself, his normal self this year. The curveball has still getting a lot of swinging strikes, which is solid, but the fastball has not been where it needs to be. He is coming off a strong start, though, but that was at AT&T Park. Now he comes back to Chase Field, where he has better overall splits, but no one would lie to you and say it's a better park for pitching. Where are we at on Godley at 9,700 on DraftKings and 93 on FanDuel?
I like him in cash games a lot. I expect he'll be the highest owned pitcher on the slate here, because it's a good matchup against San Diego. Everyone loves to target it. He has been pitching better lately. We've seen him incorporate his curveball a bit more over the last couple of months. His strikeout percentage since the start of July is up to about 26.5% from 24% for the season. So we've seen him pitch a little bit better, and it is, a really good matchup against the Padres here. So there's nothing that I don't like about Godley other than in tournaments. I don't think there's any issue if you want to be contrarian and go with different pitchers, like I've mentioned, finding the money for DeGrom and then paying down at SP2, because you don't have to even look that far back to remind yourself that this is baseball and weird stuff happens in tournaments. We just had John Gray strike out like 2 Padres in 6 innings the other day at, I don't know, like 40 or 50% ownership. And not that that's something that happens very often, but if you are going to see Godley on the 2 pitcher sites, pushing 50% ownership, there's never really going to be a 5-game slate where it's a bad play to go a different direction there. So from that standpoint, I don't mind, pivoting off of him in tournaments, but in cash games, I want to get Godley in there. I think that, like on DraftKings, where he's, $4,000 less than DeGrom, and I think he's almost $3,000 less on FanDuel, you are just getting, good savings on a slate where there are plenty of expensive bats to pay up for.
You wrote the deep dive today. Is there anything you've noticed different about Godley, or should we be expecting the same as it's been?
The curveball usage has been up over the last couple of months. In his last few starts, it's been more in line with what he's done for the season. But in general, coinciding with this string of him, being good in most of his starts, it has been him throwing the curveball more than he was earlier in the year.
Yeah, in August, he was throwing it 40% of the time, 45% in July. It's a high usage pitch for sure. I mean, it's his best out pitch. He works the cutter in quite a bit as well. The one thing we talk about quite often, he doesn't have a 4-seamer. So throwing the sinker a third of the time, he really does rely on that cutter and curve to get the swinging strikes, to get the upside, to give you those outs by way of strikeout.
Yeah, for sure.
So, all right, let's look at this Arizona offense then against Brian Mitchell. Brian Mitchell hasn't been particularly good, to put it lightly. This guy is, if you just look at the power that he's surrendered through, I think only 7 starts, 48 innings. He is a right-handed pitcher that's allowed 7 home runs already to righties, almost 2.5 home runs per 9, Adam, with a 7.8% K rate. He has a negative K minus BB rate against lefties and righties, both of them. He gets a decent amount of ground balls, but his line drive rate against same-handed bats is through the roof. So is his hard hit rate. I mean, there's just so much about Brian Mitchell that screams I'm terrible.
Yeah, he's really, really bad. And if you're not, if you are taking teams from outside Texas, this is, I think, one of the best spots on the slate, at least against the starting pitcher. Mitchell, really bad. Like you said, he walks a lot of guys, which makes for an appealing spot to stack. He doesn't get strikeouts. He's been giving up power to righties. You don't expect that he'll keep suppressing power against lefties either. So it's just a really good spot. The thing that I guess the word of caution for Arizona stacks is that this Padres bullpen has been very good all season long. That's still been the case lately. And if they don't get to Mitchell early and blow the game open, if they somehow, let Mitchell go 4 or 5 innings and keep this a close game, you're going to get some pretty good San Diego relievers that can make life really difficult for the Diamondbacks. So whereas I think in the game in Texas, you have added upside throughout the game because you're going to get not very good relievers coming in, that's not necessarily going to be the case here. So that's something where if it appears, and again, I haven't looked too much into ownership yet. I know Josh and Jake will, but if it appears that you are going to get Arizona as the highest owned stack here with the highest implied run total, then that would be a reason that I can convince myself to go to some other offenses, is how good this Padres bullpen's been.
Yeah, certainly. And it has been very good. It's an element of the game that needs to be paid close attention to. By the way, seeing some chatter in the YouTube chat, Adam, about Godley being rocked by San Diego last time out. And yeah, he was. It was one start. But also, if you look at this lineup, you have 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 6 righties, and then the pitcher who's left-handed. So there are 2 lefties in the lineup, Adam. Zach Godley on the season has a K rate that is 6% higher against righties than it is against lefties, a lower walk rate, a 3.5 xFIP. The numbers against same-handed pitcher or hitters have been better, especially from a strikeout perspective. They don't have many lefties at all in this lineup. I think it's a pretty solid lineup for Godley, who, by the way, has a 14.3% swinging strike rate against righties. That's an elite number. It may not have translated to elite strikeout totals yet, but a 27% K rate against righties is pretty solid when you're facing 6 of them and a left-handed pitcher.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, I'm not going to take into account the fact that he just got beat up by San Diego, but I will. I mean, obviously, you can use that as an example of if you are going to see him at massive ownership, it's a phenomenal spot, but it's not like he's going to come through, 100% of the time, or he's going to be the highest scoring pitcher on the slate, 60% of the time or something. There's still a lot that can happen. And if he's going to be that highly owned, I think in tournaments, there's still merit to getting away from him and maybe leveraging with, like a Galvis or Urias at a very weak position, or Will Myers or Renfroe or someone that does have home run upside.
Yep, no doubt about it. All right. I guess there's not much more on this game. I mean, you have San Diego in tournaments. In cash, though, it'd be hard to get away from Godley, especially with this lineup.
I mean, this is, and I'm not playing cash tonight, but if you're someone that does play cash at tournaments, I think that it's kind of the perfect spot to have Godley in your cash lineups and then be underweight on him in tournaments, because I think he is one of the best point per dollar plays, but he's probably just going to be higher owned than he needs to be on, a short 5-game slate against the Padres.
Right. And another thing, too, is when you look at this Padres team, they do have power. And I don't think they get enough credit for the power that they have. It's not always there because they strike out a lot, though. And if you look at the K rates against righties this year, you have a lot of really high K rates. Reyes is at 32%. Renfroe's at 28. Hedges is at 27% strikeout rates. Even Galvis is at 25. Hell, even Hosmer has seen his K rate rise up around 24%. So throughout this lineup, the bats that strike out at you have no Jankowski. So the sub 20% strikeout guys would be Urias, who has seen 19 plate appearances, and then Manny Margot. That's it. So there's definitely upside here. And I think that's something you have to consider as well. All right. Yeah. Mets and the Dodgers, Jacob DeGrom, Alex Wood. DeGrom coming in at 13,400 on DraftKings, 11,800 on FanDuel, Adam. You look at expected run totals, it should come as no surprise to anybody that the Dodgers are sub 4. Now they're at 3.8 because they're still a pretty decent, not pretty decent. They're a good offense. It's a good Dodgers offense facing DeGrom at Dodger Stadium. He's very expensive, but we know what he's capable of doing. Curious to hear your take here, and I'm assuming that DeGrom won't be nearly as popular, being that he is facing the Dodgers and he costs an arm and a leg.
Right, and that's what I'm expecting here. I don't think that he's going to go unowned by any stretch,
Of
but I don't
course
think he'll
not.
be the right. But I don't think he'll be the most popular pitcher because everyone knows that this is a tough matchup against the Dodgers. You have Alex Wood, who he's facing in a better spot against the Mets. You have Godley against the Padres. You have some people that'll save money and go down to a Stroman or an Erasmo Ramirez.
Yep.
And I think that like on DraftKings, that's probably going to end up with Jacob DeGrom around like 30% ownership, which while that's not low on a 5-game slate where he is very clearly the most talented pitcher on the slate and has just the most raw point upside. Like he's the one that is the most likely to, if anyone on the slate goes for like 45 DraftKings points, it's most likely DeGrom, even though it's a tough matchup. I just think that finding a way to get to him in tournaments makes a ton of sense because he has that raw point upside, but also the mid range with Wood and Godley, it's only really two pitchers that you're concerned about. And it's going to be a very popular pairing. So if just one of them comes out and underwhelms and DeGrom has a big game, you just have such a leg up on the rest of the field that I think it's a good spot to get to. You'll end up with a little bit different roster construction as well, just naturally by going overweight on him. So in cash games, I would pair Godley and Wood, and in tournaments, I would look to get up to DeGrom.
Yeah, and look, when you're an elite pitcher like Godley, you're very capable of exploiting any matchup, no matter how good or bad. Uh, and I don't think any of us would try and argue that this is a good matchup for DeGrom. But the guy has been so just he's been as electric as you can possibly find any pitcher out there. I mean, as consistent a pitcher as you could find. Double-digit strikeouts in 4 of his last 5. I can't remember the last time he's allowed more than 3 earned runs in a start. He's just been outrageously good. So I'm with you there, and I do think ownership for a 5-game slate. We have to look at this. It's all relative. Uh, Makes a lot of sense if you're looking at tournaments. But on the other side, Alex Wood is probably going to be very popular as well. Uh, Not because he's the highest upside pitcher, he certainly isn't, but because this Mets team is pure garbage when it comes to facing left-handed pitching. I mean, their active roster right now is 29th in weighted on base average. They are 30th in isolated slugging. They are 29th in weighted runs created plus, and they are now second highest in K rate at 25.8 behind only the White Sox. Alex Wood is someone that does a very good job of preventing damage by way of runs. He isn't the highest strikeout pitcher. His swinging strike rate on the year, Adam, is up a little bit from before. It's just shy of 11%, and now he's priced up to 9,200 on DraftKings. He's 87 on FanDuel. But this is a very, very good matchup. And right now, this Mets team has the lowest expected run total at 3.2.
Yeah, obviously the Mets are really bad, and Alex Wood's a very good pitcher, and that's why I would pair him with Godley in cash games. He's just someone who I think he has a high floor, and he's probably a better point per dollar play than DeGrom, where he's like $4,000 less expensive. But I would like to get away from him in tournaments just because his range of outcomes is so heavily weighted towards like the 18 to 22 fantasy point range, which is fine. It's very nice for cash games, but it can be beat pretty easily in tournaments, whether it's by a cheap pitcher, overperforming and having a ceiling game, or just by DeGrom getting 30, raw points and giving you a little bit of a leg up in tournaments. So I do like the idea of pivoting off of him. And one reason that we know his upside isn't as high as these other guys, in addition to just not having the strikeout stuff that Godley or DeGrom has, in his last 10 starts, he's exceeded or thrown at least 100 pitches just 3 times. By comparison, you
Dave
have Jacob DeGrom.
Roberts.
Right. And by comparison, you have Jacob DeGrom, who's done it in 9 of his last 10 starts. And, from a raw point standpoint, that just matters. So I'd rather fade Wood than Godley if I'm choosing between the two, assuming that they're somewhat close in ownership, just because I do think Godley is the one that's more likely to go over 30 points. But I think that both are probably fadeable for DeGrom in tournaments.
When you talk about range of outcomes with Alex Wood, the probability that he finishes with 30 or more DraftKings points is not particularly high, especially when factoring in Dave Roberts is not letting this guy throw 110 pitches. He's not gonna, he can go 7 innings at him, but he has to work very efficiently, and it doesn't happen that often.
Yep.
Just in terms of probabilities, his upside is capped in a number of ways.
Right. And when you just kind of think about how a pitcher is efficient, it kind of becomes obvious why his upside is capped, and he really doesn't put up those big performances that often, because for him to be efficient from a pitch standpoint, he needs to end at bats quickly. And if he's ending at bats quickly, he's probably not striking out a lot of guys. So You're, in his case, a lot of times you're trading off, either strikeouts for innings pitched or vice versa. And to really hit that, 30 to 35 raw point mark, you need innings and strikeouts combined in most cases.
So you have Alex Wood behind DeGrom and Godley.
For tournaments, yeah, I'd use him in cash games, assuming that I can fit him with
Godley and Wood in cash.
Yeah, Godley number 1, and then assuming I can still get, decent bats with Wood, he'd be my SP2.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. It's hard to have any interest in hitters here.
Yeah, the only argument would be they're going to be 2% owned on a 5-game slate.
Yeah. Even so, like against DeGrom, yeah, he does. He's allowed 8 home runs in 182 innings.
Yeah, the Dodgers are just so good that I think there's at least merit, but it's not something that I would be excited about, or that I'm saying, oh, this is a spot where there's a definite edge by having a ton of Dodgers. It's just, if you wanted to take on just really talented hitters at low ownership, this is where it is.
And pricing on a few of them is down. You have Grandal, Jock, Bellinger, Puig, all of them under 4K on DraftKings. So you're definitely not overpaying in a really bad matchup, which is what it is. On the opposite side, you talk about good bats. Well, the Mets don't really offer many of them.
No, not at all. Ahmed Rosario would be the guy that I'm most interested in, just because shortstop is a pretty weak position. We've seen Rosario hit better lately, but that's still not even anything I'm going to prioritize.
Yeah, it's hard to. And Alex Wood has never allowed more than 7 stolen bases in a season.
Yeah, that's impressive.
It's really impressive. It's really, granted, the dude's been hurt so many times, but still, no, he's done an excellent job of limiting stolen bases. And no, it's not because he's left-handed. That's not true. For years, 2 of the worst pitchers at holding runners were left-handed, in John Lester and Cole Hamels. So, yeah, that's an
Carlos
old wives' tale.
Your boy Carlos Rodon's up there now too.
Yeah, when you have Carlos Rodon, Kevin Smith battery, it's just a free pass.
Yeah,
every single time.
It's not quite as bad as the Giolito Smith one, but it's up there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's bad. It's the same thing with what we've had with the Mets for many years, like Mats and Syndergaard and a lot. Many of them in that rotation just cannot hold runners.
Yeah, and then Plawecki can't throw.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's get to Baltimore and Seattle. Last game here. Erasmo Ramirez and Josh Rogers. Yes, believe it or not, because he's facing this Baltimore team inside a very pitcher-friendly venue at Safeco. The Baltimore Orioles have the second lowest implied run total. It is at 3.4. It is tied with the San Diego Padres, who are facing Zach Godley. Yes, that's right. The Baltimore Orioles have a lower implied run total by nearly a half a run than the Dodgers, who are facing Jacob deGrom. So chew on that, Adam. Good old Erasmo Ramirez coming into his home stadium to take on Baltimore. I don't see a lineup yet, but one thing that is for certain is that Erasmo Ramirez has struggled a lot more against left-handed hitters for his career, but he's still Erasmo Ramirez.
Yeah, this is one where I'm actually really interested to see ownership. I just started kind of looking around and I'm seeing him projected even higher than I expected him to be, probably because of Baltimore's implied run total. I really like him if he's going to be, reasonably owned, like 20% or less on the two pitcher sites. If he's going to be pushing like 30 to 40%, he's just not a good enough pitcher that I would really want to be, overweight on him at that ownership, because I think it is a good spot. But this is a guy who, if you go back for a couple of seasons, he's thrown like 135 innings as a starting pitcher. He has about an 18% strikeout rate, about a 340 WOBA, a 4.5 xFIP. Like, he's just a average to below average pitcher who is better against righties, but I don't know. He's just not the kind of pitcher where I would want to have him at really high ownership. So it's really going to depend, and it's something that I know Jake and Josh will touch on. But it's really going to depend on where he does end up being projected ownership wise as we get closer to lock. How much of him I actually want, because I think it is a good spot in this ballpark against the Orioles, but the talent is just not there. And where there are pivots like Marcus Stroman, who's more talented, or like Josh Rogers, who is in a much worse spot and not as talented, but going to be, a fraction of the ownership. When you're talking about winning tournaments on slates like this, pivoting off of the highest owned, not very good pitcher is a pretty decent way to go.
So on awesomeo.com, the DraftKings MLB main slate ownership projections has Erasmo Ramirez at 45%. That seems a bit high.
Yeah, it seems high to me too, and that's why I'm interested to see what it updates to at the last release closer to lock. But if he is actually projected to be that high, then Baltimore becomes a really appealing leverage stack to me, and I just would lower my interest in Ramirez because, yeah, I think he's likely to come through pretty often, but I just don't think he's good enough to really ever be that highly owned.
Yeah, Erasmo Ramirez at almost 50% is an auto fade. I don't care if it's a one game slate. Like you
play the long reliever behind them.
Play the long reliever. Yeah, you'd have a tough time convincing me of that. Yeah, right now Zach Godley at 50% projected ownership. Ramirez second at 45. Alex Wood at 42. Mind you, two pitcher site. Jacob deGrom at 28. Marcus Stroman at 22. And then it falls off a cliff, right? As it should. Shoemaker 7, Springs, Rogers, Mitchell, all below 5%. That doesn't mean play them for leverage. It just means that they're not going to be touched as they shouldn't be. But
Yeah.
yeah, so Stroman right now expected to have just slightly less ownership than Jacob deGrom, but deGrom, literally looking like, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him with half the ownership of Godley and almost 20% less ownership than Alex Wood because of his price.
Yeah, I didn't realize. So the ownership projections actually had updated between what you just said and when I'd last looked. So Ramirez stayed at 45% in that update too. So
Wow.
yeah, I mean, I like the spot, but I guess the way you like to look at it for tournaments, and I'll just use Josh Rogers, who he's pitching against, as an example. Rogers is, $900 less on DraftKings. So the Mariners, obviously, it's a much tougher spot for Rogers. But if Rogers is projected at 5% and Ramirez is 45, so let's say those are the ownerships for sake of argument. Does Erasmo Ramirez and his career 18% strikeout rate and 4.5 xFIP beat Josh Rogers, 90% of the time?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Now, I guess the question too is, we're not saying does it beat him 90% of the time in the same matchup. We have to at least account.
You're right. In these matchups, like, does Ramirez against Baltimore beat Rogers 90% of the time Rogers is facing?
No, you're right. In this matchup, no. I mean, look, rostering Josh Rogers isn't really going to get you very excited either.
No.
But no, it's a salient point that 45% Erasmo Ramirez I mean, you think about this. If Erasmo Ramirez gets blown up in the first few innings, are you going to be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe it. I,
Right.
how how did this happen? He was a lock." Erasmo Ramirez, you know what? He just got babbipped. This is variance, Adam. No, it's it's Erasmo Ramirez. Now look, he's facing Baltimore in a really solid park. Can he have a good game? Absolutely. But I think at that type of ownership, it's crazy. Now at the same time, Josh Rogers is not someone that's going to rack up the strikeouts, particularly against Seattle. So, um, honestly, I don't even know if you'd have to go that low. Like, I almost want to just say you could take Stroman at half of the ownership, or less than half of Erasmus' ownership, and still have leverage.
Yeah, I would much rather play like a 30% owned or whatever Marcus Stroman than a 45% owned Ramirez.
Right, and he's at 22% right now.
Yeah. And,
So
and one other point about Josh Rogers, while obviously he's not very good and he doesn't have a lot of strikeout upside, you also do get the added bonus of he's facing this dangerous Seattle lineup that is going to have ownership with a 5.2 implied run total. So while you'd be taking a popular pitcher in Ramirez who's not creating any leverage for you because he's facing a team that no one's going to have hitters from, you can get a lower owned Rogers where you get a leg up on the field if he beats Ramirez because of ownership, but also because you're leveraging against all the stacks that have these Seattle hitters if he happens to pitch well. So it's not a spot that it's going to come through all that often, but as long as you're playing tournaments with reasonably good bankroll management, if you take spots like this consistently and do it all the time, it is a plus EV spot if the ownership does come out as widespread as we think it's going to.
yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah, and if you play Erasmo Ramirez at 45% every day, um, you might not have the greatest results. It is a good spot, but at almost 50%. I mean, obviously these are just projected ownerships. We still don't know where it's gonna land, but that's a lot. I mean, that is a lot, and I think more so when you consider that Marcus. It's not like Marcus Stroman is a significantly worse pitcher than Ramirez. They're both very bad in their own right. So yeah. Um, if you were looking at this game in terms of bats, on the opposite side, you do have Josh Rogers, and to be fair, Josh Rogers has, I guess, throughout the minors, he's been all right. He's a contact pitcher. He gets a league average amount of ground balls. He gives up a league average amount of home runs, and he does not do much in terms of swinging strikes either, which is a relatively important thing to mention. In AAA this year, Josh Rogers had an 8% swinging strike rate, Adam, and that was at the AAA level. So, I mean, this guy is going to pitch to contact, and he's not going to induce the type of ground balls that they just have him killing worms all of the time. Like, you're going to get a decent amount of hard contact and fly balls from him. I guess the question is it necessary to pick on him here at this park?
Yeah, I mean, I do like the Mariners here, and I think that Nelson Cruz obviously is a very good one-off, but where the Mariners have the most appeal for me is in the form of full stacks because you have a very bad Baltimore bullpen behind Rogers. Rogers himself, doesn't project as anything special. He was kind of a throw in the Zach Britton deal from the Yankees, and he projects as like a 4A guy who is probably decent enough to make spot starts here and there, but he's not going to last in the major leagues consistently, most likely. This is a decent park for him to pitch in. Obviously, pitching in Safeco Field is more friendly for a pitcher like him than pitching in, say, Camden Yards. But it's still a very nice spot for Seattle hitters. And then you factor in that he has just a bad bullpen behind them as well. It is a really high upside spot here.
I think so too. I like this spot. I like Seattle against righties or against lefties. I just think there's a lot of pop here and a lot of upside. In terms of highest owned stacks, looking at the numbers here, where do you think you're going to come in highest on?
Probably the Texas game.
Yeah, yeah, you won't be alone there. I mean, I
No,
don't blame you for it, but
no, but I mean, I think there's enough ways where you can. I think that the Mariners and the Diamondbacks will pull enough ownership that it's not like I'm playing, super popular, at least full stacks. Like some of
Right.
the hitters, I'm sure will be. But also, just differentiating at pitcher with guys that people aren't going to play that will come through often enough. I think is a profitable way to approach it.
Yeah, let me say this too. We do have the Mariners lineup, and I like this for stacking purposes. Haniger, Segura, Cano, Nelson Cruz. You have Ryan Healy batting fifth, Kyle Seager, Cameron Maben, Mike Zunino, D. Gordon.
Yeah, don't sleep on Kyle Seager either. Third base isn't that deep, and he can hit lefties really, really well. And then also Zanino, I think, is up there with Chirinos as a top catching option.
Yeah, agreed. Also, none of these guys are really egregiously overpriced for the matchup. Kyle
No,
Seager specifically, 3,400 on DraftKings. Zunino's got some pop. He's either going to strike out 4 times or give you a home run, so it's worth a look. He's 3,100, and then Cruz, Haniger. They're not going to come in really cheap, but they're also not going to kill you either. So I like Seattle a lot here, and I just think because you have this Texas game. You're probably going to see some ownership shift away from them. They still do have a pretty high run total according to Vegas, but I like them here. I definitely like them here, and I wouldn't be surprised if they come in lower than if they're like the fourth most popular team behind Texas, Angels, and Arizona. So I guess we'll find out. All right, Adam, let's do as we always do here and give our top positions. We'll give our top stacks as well, even though it's only a 5-game slate. And tournament pivots, tournament fades as well. Let's go to the pitcher position first. Tell me what you got.
Godley would be where I start my cash games and hope that I can get them both. If I had to drop to Ramirez, I guess that's fine. But I would try and get both of those guys. I really like trying to get up to DeGrom in tournaments because I think that he's just going to be lower owned than he should on any 5-game slate. I like Marcus Stroman more than I like Ramirez in tournaments.
All right. Give me yeah, in cash, Godley and Wood seems pretty stable. And then DeGrom, I mean, just gauging Ramirez ownership, I'll go Stroman over him, and at a pretty close cost on 2 pitcher sites. I think in terms of range of outcomes, you're you're not getting Ramirez as you were talking about over Rogers, but just compared to Stroman, you're not getting the 80-90% positive result from a Ramirez over Stroman. It's just no.
And I mean, I
They
think
both.
Stroman's a better pitcher. I don't think it's that close.
Oh no, he's well when he's healthy, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, we'll see. But as a tournament second pitcher, especially if you're pairing him with DeGrom, it'll free things up for you, right? You pair him with DeGrom in tournaments, you have a little bit of room to work with. Pairing DeGrom with a Zach Godley or an Alex Wood puts you behind the 8 ball. You really have nothing. You have $3,400 per player, and it sets you back before you even start adding your positions. All right, catcher, Adam.
Zanino, Chirinos are the two that I like.
Yeah,
Alex Avila,
Zunino
I
and
guess.
yeah, I thought about throwing him in there, but man, that just feels it makes me sick
Brian
to my
Mitchell's just
stomach a
so
little
bad.
bit. What's that?
Brian Mitchell's just so bad.
Yeah, Alex Avila is not much. Like Brian Mitchell could actually
No,
strike Avila out,
yeah.
and I wouldn't be surprised. All right, first base.
Joey Gallo, Paul Goldschmidt, and Ryan Healy. Actually,
Yeah, Healy.
Chris Davis is a really good tournament play for leverage against Ramirez.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, give me Ryan Healy. I really like that price point, especially if you have trouble getting the Goldschmidt and you're not MMEing. You're playing a few lineups. Goldschmidt, Healy, and it gets. You said Chris Davis is interesting. I guess Healy and Goldschmidt are my 2 top guys here. All right, let's go to second base. Um, I don't mind Cano batting third. I know it's a lefty-lefty matchup. Yeah, obviously, Rogner Odor is in play. Daniel Descalso. Hell, you could even throw David Fletcher into the mix as well. It's not a bad second base position, given that we only have 5 games.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I love Odor. If I can't get up to him, I do like trying to save some money here, whether that's going to David Fletcher, who I think is a decent cash play because he puts the ball in play so much. Brandon Lau as a tournament option
Yeah,
because he does have some power against Stroman. Even Urias in tournaments as a leverage play if you're fading Zach Godley.
yeah. I don't hate Brandon Lau at all. If you're looking to go cheap there, this season Yeah, you're not talking about a huge sample size, but he's got a little bit of pop. All right, so third base, what do you have?
Eduardo Escobar, Jurickson Profar, Kyle Seager.
Yeah, Escobar. You have Fletcher eligible there. You also have Descalso on multi-position eligibility sites, and then Kyle Seager's just egregiously cheap. I mean, if you're stacking Seattle and you need salary relief, you can do it with Seager very easily um, at a position that's not too deep. Shortstop, Escobar, Elvis Andrews. Like Andrews at his ripe age of 70 is not great anymore, but he's still really cheap. I have no problem going there. I like Gene Segura a lot too against Josh Rogers. Wish his splits with the platoon advantage were better, but I'm not sure Josh Rogers is going to last that long anyway. What do you have here?
Yeah, Simmons, Andrus. I really don't mind Manny Machado where he's reasonably priced. Like he's 4,500 on DraftKings. I think that in tournaments, paying less money for Manny Machado than Gene Segura probably is a profitable move.
All right, and then outfield, a few guys each. Go ahead.
Trout, everyone on Texas except for Delano DeShields. Cole Calhoun, I mentioned I really like in tournaments. David Peralta probably goes a little bit. Actually, I don't know with that implied run total, but in general, he goes overlooked just because he doesn't have the name value of other guys. Nelson Cruz, Mitch Haniger.
Yeah, you pretty much named them all. Haniger and Cruz, True, Mazzara. It's pretty concentrated here. I think there's not a whole lot to get away from here, but probably 3 or 4 different teams that you could load up on the outfield from. And then top stacks, Adam. We've mentioned it a few times throughout the show. I'll point it out one more time for anyone that tuned in late. Highest expected run totals right now: Arizona at 5.7 against Brian Mitchell. Texas 5.5 against Shoemaker. Seattle at 5.2 against Rogers. And then you have LA, the Angels at 5.1 against Springs. Then it drops off. You have Toronto at 4.3 against Rin Stanek and Yanni Chirinos. And then Tampa Bay against Marcus Stroman at 4.2. Everyone else is below 4.
Yeah, I mean the four obvious ones are my favorites. You know, Texas, the Angels, the Diamondbacks, and the Mariners. Baltimore is my favorite off the board just because you can leverage against the worst chalk pitcher on the slate.
All right. Yeah, for me, I think I'm throwing Seattle up there at the top. I think right now the Seattle might be my favorite, but clearly Texas, LA, and Arizona. It's really hard to feel good about being different and stacking the Mets or even the Dodgers for that matter. Hell, even Baltimore. But that Erasmo Ramirez ownership could change your mind. But right now, Seattle, LA, and Texas with Arizona in there as well. That'll do it for us. Thanks as always. Tuning into the first episode of the Deeper Dive. We'll be doing this throughout the week at 5 p.m. Eastern. Stick around for Jake and Josh. They're going to lead you up to lock for this 5-game slate. Hope you had a good Labor Day. We'll catch you back here tomorrow, Tuesday night on the Deeper Dive.